Well, this is made just as the cameras were in the 19th century. Beautiful mahogany, wonderful seams, great brass banding around here. Obviously a precision instrument.
Very sturdy.
Very sturdy.
Very sturdy, yes.
Because what we have here require great accuracy so that you can see the final result. It's a chromoscope, and these are what are known as chromograms, and you have here is a set of 3 stereo photographs. Now, stereo photographs being photographs which are taken by a stereo camera.
3D.
3D,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
The camera's lenses were as far apart as your eyes, so that when you put them into a viewer, you've got this marvelous 3D effect. Now, here, let me just take this down. Here we have 3 filters, a red filter, a filter being a piece of colored glass, a blue colored glass, and a green colored glass. And by laying these in the appropriate way, they have to slot in very precisely. These are black and white photographs, of course, or black and white positives, I should say.
They're very clear pictures if you look at singly
Well,
at the black
I'll
and
have a
whites.
look.
Yes.
And then that ground glass screen fits in there. There's a reflecting mirror to project the light onto the image, and then that fits all together like that. And hopefully, if everything's in the right slot, the mixture of the red, blue and green filters will create a colour photograph. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's wonderful.
Absolutely incredible.
Yes.
And of course, at a time when colour photography was unknown, this would have been almost like watching the television. And
Wonderful.
Today, really very collectible. Well, it's going to be worth between perhaps £1,500 and £2,000.
Really?
It is a major piece of photographic equipment.
Now, this is a loving cup made for presentation.
Yes, for presentation,
Yes.
and it was I know that the last name was Lister, but I
Yes.
couldn't tell you what the initials were. But it was left to my husband in Mr. Lister's will.
This is a super loving cup, I suppose,
That's right.
painted most beautifully by Hartshorn.
Yes,
Now,
that's
is he a relation?
Yes, my husband's grandfather.
Husband's grandfather.
Yeah.
Was the actual painter of that exotic parrot.
Yes,
marvellous,
that's right.
isn't it? Beautiful painting.
Yes.
So the person
Yes.
it was made for left
Yes,
it to
left it to
Mr.
my
Hartshorn.
husband. That's
No, that's
right.
right. Like.
That's
Now,
right.
it's got a marvellous mark. This is called the ampersand mark.
Yes.
Which is one of the great Coalport marks of the mid-19th century.
Is it?
And Hartshorn is one of the great painters. So I think it's a
Yes.
wonderful mark. I think that's tremendous.
Yes,
And this
yes.
is
That's-
Mr. Hartshorn himself.
That's
This is
it.
James the Hartshorn, the
James,
painter of this.
The painter of that.
And he's wearing this fabulous...
It's a smoking cap.
This is the smoking cap that he's wearing.
Yeah.
Might I try
That's
it
over.
on? Always wanted to try a smoking cap on. I don't think it fits me. I've got too big a head. But isn't it
That's over.
wonderful?
Yes.
He started painting for Coalport about 1859 and ran on into the 20th century. So he's
Did he
a
really?
very, very great painter. Although this is a little bit damaged, a
Yes,
little bit
that's right.
cracked.
Yes, it is.
So look after it. But I think its value, well, inestimable in the family. But I would reckon something like about £800 to £1,000.
Would you really?
So look after the work.
Oh, I shall, yeah.
I inherited them from my grandmother.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I don't know how much she paid
No.
for them. I know that she didn't pay very much because the shopkeeper told her they were fakes.
I wonder what he thought they were fake for.
I don't know.
I think I'm breaking the 10th commandment here because I really do covet these. And this is very, very exciting for me because these are by the Davenport factory. I've written about Davenport, I've collected Davenport myself for nearly 30 years, so it's really exciting to see these. And I don't think I've seen a better service, really the whole time, and certainly not one signed by the artists. They very rarely sign their works. This one you see here, Wrekin, painted by our Ablett. Now, we can tell quite a bit from it. The mark itself here, you see Davenport, Longport, Staffordshire, that's where the factory was. It was founded in 1794 and it closed in 1887. The number underneath there is a pattern number. That gives us a clue to the date, as the mark does. And these are really going to be about 1865, something like that.
thought that was the date mark.
Oh, I see. You thought they were made in 1910?
Yeah.
No, they were made at least 50, 60 years before that. And they really are super. Quite splendid. I mean, there's Loch Katrine, there's a whole range of different things here, everyone with a different scene. They are, of course, in standard bone china, the shapes of the 1860s, and, well, an individual plate now at an antique fair would be certainly 150, maybe 200 pounds.
No.
Yeah, they are very, very good pieces, so multiply by 12. And certainly, I think we've got £1,500 to £2,000.
Oh, no.
Certainly insure them for that.
Oh, I thought I'd be lucky if I got about £10 a plate.
Well, I'm sorry if I've upset you, but they are so good. The condition is so good.
This particular pair of pistols are English. They are screw-off barrel percussion pocket pistols that a gentleman would buy if he's going to do a journey from London to Dover, carrying money or valuables. He would have a pair of pistols, one in each pocket. This was a usual thing in the old days of coaching. I mean, one never knows, you know, the old footpads and the highwaymen, that sort of thing. Now, you've got the bullet mould here with a little block on the end. There we are. So you can completely screw off the barrel. Now, the gunpowder was put in this recess here, and then the ball was placed on top, and then the barrel was screwed back on to the ball. Now, the purpose of this is that when the pistol was fired, the shot would carry one way, and all the gases would be behind it. The pistols have hidden triggers, and the trigger comes down on the second pull, so that when you fire it, the triggers can go back into a nice smooth position. When you want to clean the pistol, there we are, that's a safety cock, so that you can clean around the nipples. Now, the pistols themselves are made by a man called Southall. Now, Southall had a business in London from about 1815 to 1840. So, you've got a very, very nice pair of pistols here. Is there any family background to the pistols?
They belong to my in-laws, and they brought them from a house sale in the 60s sometime.
Right.
For about, they think it was about £75 they paid for them.
Well, today, that little pair of pistols, and they're so delightful, would fetch something in the region of £1,000. So,
Very nice.
a nice increase over the years.
Yes, lovely.
I'm going to let you take only one of these items home with you.
Is that right?
Which one are you going to take home?
I'm going to take the candlestick, because I've got the other one at home.
You're going to take the candlestick?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's very nice, because that leaves me this. 1760.
Oh, really?
Staffordshire.
Yes.
Worth £1,500 to £2,000.
What?
It's okay, I'll let you take it home, I promise. But it is a particularly beautiful little object. And, well, what do you say about an object like that? It speaks for itself, but the beautiful detail in the modelling of the head, and very little colour just to heighten the whole modelling of the piece. Beautiful object. Nice.
Good heavens, thank you.
Well, now, there is a lot of interest in Churchilliana. This one is a very famous portrait. It's extremely well known. Churchill had thousands of them and gave them out to everybody. What is really nice about this one is that not only is it signed by Winston Churchill, and that's an absolutely genuine signature, but it's also signed by Vivienne, who is the very famous photographer who took this picture originally. Now, these are highly collectible, but the problem is that this is faded. So it's only worth £750 to £800.
The colour is wonderful. It really shines at you. Have you been polishing it lovingly?
Yes, that's the old polish, yes. Mother made, you know, always with the beeswax and turpentine.
Right.
Yeah.
But looking at it, one's always a bit suspicious about these oak chests or coffers made for linen. And when you look at the proportions of this, there are two things I don't like. The legs are a bit high. the top here overhangs a bit too much. And so what to me looks like a really first-rate, beautiful colour piece of 17th century furniture, I have to take it a stage further and investigate it a bit. The front panelling is absolutely fine 17th century panelling. All of this is absolutely right. The carving, the depth of carving, the pilasters, the lovely little arcading with this guilloche carving here. But when you examine the side panels and the front panels, there's a difference in the quality of carving. So one has to ask oneself, did the same man make the front and the side? And I'm afraid, I think that somebody made the front in the 17th century, possibly for a coffer, possibly to go over a fireplace, and so somebody's made the sides about 90 to 100 years ago to match the front. And is there any family history about it?
Well,
somebody's going to prove me wrong or something.
There is some family history, yes.
Oh, isn't that lovely? So it was in a cowshed. All the other furniture was taken on a horse-drawn wagon, which set on fire as the men were smoking. I see, so the coffer had been left behind.
That's right.
Otherwise it would have gone up in smoke.
Right, yes.
I'm going to just open up the top and look inside. The giveaway is at the front here. When you look at the 17th century wainscot panelling, the wall panelling, it's been applied, or the front here has been applied to it. You can see the join there, with an old-looking lock, which isn't a 17th century lock. I'm really being horrible here, aren't I?
Really?
But I think it's really been made to look like an old one. Although this is a beautiful piece of oak furniture, I'm sure it's been made up.
Just fancy that.
Yeah, very carefully done from old timber.
All those years ago.
All those years ago. And I still think that it was something, because of the beautiful colour, that would cost about £1,500 to buy in a shop, at least.
Yes, yes.
So quite an expensive piece.
Quite, yes.
When I was up in London one day, I went to an antique market and I saw this pair and I rather liked them, so I decided to buy them.
They're both extremely good examples of this artist's work. They're both by Charles Dixon, and he was able, in a few strokes of his brush almost, to show the excitement of movement of marine subjects. And he's really best known for his marine subjects. He flourished during the latter part of the 19th century and worked right the way up to the 1930s. I think he died in 1934. Also, typically, the panoramic shape that he used so often, approximately 10 inches by 30 inches across.
Yes.
A couple of points I have to make about them, and that is their condition. Particularly the condition of this one has been a little bit affected by damp and drying, has somewhat toned down the freshness of the colour. If we look back to the top one, you can see the sharpness, the lightness of the sky, whereas I know this is slightly darker in the sense of the watercolour in the sky, but it's darker still because of that.
That's a pity. I've not done it much good then, have I?
Well, now, value today, if they were offered at auction, would be something in the region of £5,000 to £7,000.
Oh, thank you very,
so
very
your
much.
investment 30 years ago.
Gee whiz. Oh, I can't believe that.
Well, there you are.
Golly.
How did that happen?
Unfortunately, we don't know. Rather sad.
Before it came into your possession?
Or it may have been careless packing. I don't know.
Right. The cup itself is a wonderful, wonderful piece of neoclassicism. The decoration over here, as fine a decoration as you are ever going to come across on a piece of late 18th century silver. I'm saying it's silver, of course it's silver covered with gold. There's the figure of victory, blowing out from a trumpet, proclaiming the victory, and of course the laurel for the victors. You see the laurels just round there. Then the cameos that appear here, horses racing along, and of course this is really obviously what it is all about.
Yes.
Because right down at the bottom you find Doncaster Cup 1783. And that, in fact, is actually the date of the cup. There's the date letter for 1783. and the maker William Holmes, very fine maker.
Where?
Of London. So you've got the leopard's head there.
Yes.
So showing that it's of London make. The design is based on a Robert Adam design, and in fact there are a series of cups made for the Doncaster racers and also the Richmond racers. All of them superbly produced.
Did you win one each time, every
yes.
year?
Yes, it was great. You didn't have to give it back. That was the wonderful thing. You could actually keep the cup.
Amazing.
And to keep a cup like this, marvellous, absolutely marvellous. So you could not really wish to find a finer piece of neoclassic silver. Doncaster cups, Richmond cups, do always cause a lot of excitement when they come onto the market. And I'm thinking about this one, I should be thinking in terms of about £20,000. So
we knew it was a Doncaster cup, but we certainly didn't realise it was quite as much fun as that.
Well, as I was saying earlier, this part of Britain was very much the crucible of the Industrial Revolution. Iron smelting began here in 1709, and although one associates iron with massive structures like the Iron Bridge, in fact it was also used, was it not, Paul, for decorative purposes.
Very much
magnificent
so.
things like these, kindly loaned to us by the Iron Bridge Museum.
Yes, this piece I think says it all. We've got iron used for the first time as a decorative domestic material. We've got the combination of that, the unlikely combination, married with cold porcelain, delicate porcelain, hard iron, coming together in this inkstand, which says all about everything that came out of this valley in the 19th century. It was, as you say, the centre of it all. The story, of course, begins with a cooking pot like this, very basic. Everybody had them. Yes. Nicely dated, 1714.
Only 5 years after smelting began.
Yes, and Derby's patent for casting from sand was 1707. So this is right at the beginning of the casting process. That's where the history begins. And it develops on from that through all sorts of domestic uses, as you say, railway engines and bridges going on, but the art side of it expanding steadily through the 19th century.
Living side by side,
yes.
And culminating in magnificent pieces like that, which at first glance, of course, looks like a bronze.
Yes, in one level it's sad that the iron smelters felt they had to imitate bronze, but of course they couldn't sell their material without a bronze finish to it, or had difficulty because it was not accepted as an artistic material. It had been in Germany in the late 18th century, yes. But here, John Bell's famous figure from the Great Exhibition of 1851, the Eagle Slayer, reproduced here with his permission in iron with a bronze finish. It's a wonderful,
it's superb, isn't it?
Statement about what you can do with iron.
Wonderful, yes. And then right up till fairly recent times, I gather, they were making pieces like that as apprentice pieces.
Yes, you can imagine the skill of making and casting this piece, finishing it, and this is how you were passed out. If you could make one of these, basically you could do anything. And so these are the most familiar statement about Coalbrookdale and what the iron industry meant in this area.
I bought it in an old furniture sale. It was in a box. In 1960 it was, and I gave 5 shillings.
What was in the box?
Cold port cups, aperture mask, jug.
You didn't bring the other pieces along with you today?
No, I didn't.
So you think there's something special about this?
Well, I know what the rest are, but I don't know what
You don't know what this is?
No.
Okay. Well, on first sight, it appears to be German or continental tin-glazed earthenware, which is known as faience ware. It's called tin-glazed earthenware because there's a skin of tin glaze that's put on top of this pale, chalky body. And it often flakes away at the edges, and that's a classic sign of tin-glazed earthenwares. It's actually not German. It's looking at it closely, this egg yolk yellow and this very soft blue and the whole bluishness of the glaze, it has a softer feel to it than German delftware, German faience. And so I'm going to say it's English. It's English, and it could well have come from Bristol. Date, you can have a guess at the date.
No idea.
I'm going to say it's about 1700. Very nice little object. Pretty thing. Before I get even more nervous, I'm going to take this off, because that's introducing a terrific strain. You can see there's a crack developing along there. That's going to make it worse, okay? Right, now, it's worth somewhere in the region of between £400 and £600.
Wait till I see my husband. He wanted to throw it away.
He wanted to throw it away? Oh, my goodness. He's probably the man who put that on it,
He did.
Yeah, I thought so. It sounds like that sort of person.
They say it began in Worcester and finished in Worcester. So
Civil War.
this is 1651 when he fled to France.
This is Charles II to be on the run. But why is he surrounded by Cromwellian troops, or are they his own troops?
Yeah, his own troops.
So both sides wore the same sort of armour?
That's right, yes.
So this is made of heavy leather?
Yes, a buff coat would withstand a spent ball, and a spent ball could actually kill you.
Is this a ricocheted ball?
No, a spent ball is a ball that's lost its force.
Yes.
And it'll hit, so it'll go onto those buff coats and it wouldn't penetrate them. That's what I'm really saying. But this is far more beneficial to wear a buff coat than a breastplate, because the breastplate would open like a tin can inwards and do far, far more damage. So.
Well, that helps me a lot. Thank you very much, Robbie.
Okay.
What's particularly nice about these diamond earrings is their lovely condition and the nice original case. It comes from Streeter, and they were very well-known jewellers of the late 19th century in Bond Street. They were quite a large and prolific firm, and there's a catalogue which you can still get reproductions of showing all the original prices of these. These would probably have been about £5 in the 1880s.
Good gracious.
Going to the earrings, they're old-cut diamonds. They're what are called cushion-cut shaped stones, and they're a bit television screen shaped. They're not quite round. And they didn't really introduce the completely round diamond until the 1910, 1920. And so you can date these to the late 19th century because of that shape. And also, if you look very carefully at the diamonds, you'll see that the very back facet, where a modern diamond comes to a point, these have a little flat cut across the back, which looks like a little black hole if you look carefully through the diamond. And the cutting of the top part is much higher because the Victorians tried to keep as much of the weight of the diamond as possible. Whereas in the 1900s, 1920s, and 1930s, they worked out very scientifically how to cut the diamonds to give the maximum refraction. And these older diamonds have a rather attractive steely look, which the modern ones don't have. And the value of these is worked out to a great degree by the diamond weight. And we use this rather fascinating little gadget here, which has different sized holes to see the shape of the diamonds. And because they vary very slightly, you generally speaking have to use your loupe to make sure that you've got the right size. And the stones around the edge are about 10 points. That's the 10th of a carat each.
Yes.
8 in each, that's 80 points.
Yes.
160 the two. And the centre stones are about 30 points each. So you've got about 2 1/4 carats, and they're worth about 2,500.
Are they really?
It's quite a good rule of thumb to say that a carat of diamonds in a nice, desirable pair of earrings like this is worth around £1,000 a carat. It's quite a good way of working it out.
This was made by my great-great-great-grandfather, and we believe it was made for the Great Exhibition at Crystal
What was
Palace.
his name, do you know?
Charles Edmund Strugnell, and he was a cabinet maker in Islington, North London.
Oh, right. Well, that's nice. So we know it's a London piece.
Yes.
That's interesting. The Great Exhibition was 1851.
Yeah.
Now, there were other exhibitions subsequent to that. The style of this would be unlikely, in my opinion, to be as early as 1851. The reasons being are the general Chippendale shape, which I'll come to in a minute, of the legs and everything, is not typical of the 1850s at all.
No.
It's a very different style. And I think more easily to identify is this little writing compartment here, which is much more typical of furniture made, let's say, from about 1880 to about 1900.
Yeah.
And certainly, without any information from you, I would have said that it's made around 1890, so late Victorian. And although it's very fine quality, I doubt it was exhibition quality. If you actually see a piece of exhibition furniture, it's quite extraordinary, the quality. I mean, this is the best cabinet making, but they actually spent a lot longer doing the inlays, choose more expensive veneers, more expensive work on it, generally speaking. I'm not knocking this at all. It's a very nice piece of
I
furniture.
mean, that's just the story that's...
Well, I hate to turn it upside down. I really don't think it's that early. Where I think we get even later still is the legs, the Chippendale influence. And the easiest bit to look is really quite simply here. This open fretwork here. Can you see it's got almost a sort of Chinese-y look about it, hasn't it? Lattice work, sort of Gothic Chinese. And in fact, it covers the three things, the three principles that Chippendale used. This sort of Chinese lattice work, this is verging on the Gothic Islamic here, and this is the third of the three orders, if you like, that he followed in the 1750s when he was designing this Rococo C scroll here.
Yeah.
But that again is very Chippendale and leading to this cabriole leg. And again, you've got the fretwork. We've talked about the open fret in the bracket. This is blind fret here.
Yeah.
Quite simply, you can't see through it. It's blind, if you like. Similar sort of decoration. This style became very, very popular in about the 1885, 1890 period. The Chippendale revival became very, very, really gathered momentum. And this is not intended in any way to be a fake or even a copy of the original.
No.
It's an eclectic view of how a Chippendale desk should have been, the improved late 19th century version. It's a very sophisticated piece, very attractive. Have a stab at what it's worth.
I haven't got a clue. So.
I would imagine a retail price of at least £4,000 for it.
Right.
As you can imagine, a picture like this is of great interest actually to a number of experts here. In fact, I've had the privilege of checking it out, first of all with Roy, on the uniforms. Because the thing about the Victorian artists, they tend to be very accurate. And Roy is a great expert on costumes and everything else, so I wanted to ask him about whether Charles II's costume and all his men's costumes were correct. And he led me all the way through it. So he told me all about the jerkin and how it was replacement for armor against powerful spent bullets, and about the helmets, and this is a rare helmet with 3 bars, etc. But the other thing that's accurate is that this was the Battle of Worcester, which Cromwell defeated Charles II, and this is just after the battle. Charles is running off, hit in the oak, and that's the famous story. The battle took place in the beginning of September in 1651, and you can see that everything's accurate about it. It's the beginning, it's obviously in early autumn. They've fled from the battlefield, their horses are hot. You can even see the sort of panting breath of the horse in the evening, the cold evening. That's sort of the excitement that I find about these Victorian pictures, that they're very accurate, and they take you in a real way into a moment in history. How did the picture actually get?
This was one of the collection from Sir John Bailey, who was the founder of Wrekin College, and when he died, he bequeathed some of his largest pictures to the school, and this particular picture got rescued and was placed in one of the boarding houses.
Now, I suppose because they're so out of fashion, nobody thinks about them, but in a way, it does help the imagination of this rather desperate day.
Well, the headmaster's a historian, and he's interested in the picture.
Well, actually, it was a very famous picture in its day. It was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1898, so it was famous then, and it's not so popular today, but it still would command quite a good value on the market. I should say around £10,000, £10,000 to £15,000.
You had them framed on the wall, or?
I can never remember them being framed.
No.
My mother can, and as far as I know, she said they've been thrown to Rag and Bone Man.
What, the frames?
The frames
not
were.
The plaques,
not the plaques, no.
The detail in this is fantastic. There's so much going on. It's such a complicated scene. Now, this type of Austrian, German plaque of the late 19th century has become terribly desirable recently. They come in a great variety of styles. This is a most unusual one because of the intricacy of the design. All these components which fit together to form a story, the chess players and the bathers and so on, make no sense at all if you put it all together.
No.
And yet it makes a wonderful, intricate design. And this slightly sort of erotic air that they have is very characteristic again of this type of painting. This should fetch about £1,500. So, you know, there's quite a lot of money tied up in a piece like this. However, that's only part of the story, because if we take that one away, which is actually my favourite, I like very much the subject matter of that, and then much more classic is this one, which is a very much grander piece, wonderfully painted by an artist called Wagner, who was one of the top artists in this porcelain painted plaque style. Late 19th century again, the same sort of date. This is the thing that the collectors really go wild for. Which do you prefer?
I prefer this.
You prefer this one? for the style of the painting, for what it represents.
And from childhood memories as well.
Right. Plaques like this, at the very top of the market, have fetched large sums indeed. I mean, if I say to you, £8,000, possibly £10,000, and possibly even more. There is a taste for these in Japan, where they have paid even larger sums than that.
We've got a lovely collection here of Norah Wellings. We've got photographs, the dolls themselves, the original moulds. Now tell me how you got hold of them.
Well, actually, Norah Wellings was my aunt, or was my aunt, rather.
How fantastic, because of course her factory was in Wellington.
That's right.
Where we are now, and
yes.
I think that it started in about 1926.
About 1926, yeah.
The dolls that she is best known for are the velveteen and
yes.
the cloth dolls, of course. And during the day here, I've had a lot of people who used to work in her factory.
Really?
But tell me about this old couple, because they are very unusual.
These were done for the Festival of Britain exhibition, I think 1951, I believe.
Yes.
And this was actually Auntie Nora's own couple that she kept.
That's lovely to feel that we've got Norah Welling's own favourite dolls here. That's marvellous. But I can understand perhaps why they weren't great sellers. They're very evocative, but they're not really beautiful, are they?
Oh, no, not at all. They're really collector's items, aren't they, rather than... They weren't a mass-produced doll.
And this is Miss Borneo.
Yes.
The artist's eye comes through here with the mixture of the colours. This vibrant orange against this lovely sort of sallow olive. It's just gorgeous. And the popularity of Norah Welling's dolls has really gone up. And are you interested in the value? I don't know.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, obviously, these will never be sold.
No.
They'll be my grandchildren's, I hope.
This one I would have said would be perhaps £200 to £300 as an estimate. But something like the old couple, particularly since this particular pair were Norah Welling's own personal favourites, perhaps between £600 and £800.
Well, that's nice to know.
Thanks so much for bringing them.
Indeed. Thank you.
I was given it by my mother.
Did she buy it?
Yes, she did, for 50 pence. From somebody outside an auction sale. Somebody had bought some frames. This was one of the frames, and the frame was actually broken. So she went along to this person and said, "Do you really want that one? Because I'd like the picture." And they said, "You can have it for 50p.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Wonderful quality. Jessie King
yes.
was one of the Glasgow girls. And Glasgow, at the turn of the century, was a powerhouse of design. And Jessie King was not only an illustrator, but she was also a designer. She designed wallpaper, she designed fabrics, but she became internationally famous at the beginning of this century for book illustration and book covers. She went to Paris with her husband E.A. Taylor, who was also a designer and furniture manufacturer, and she's got very interested in the art of batik.
Yeah.
And she wrote a wonderful book which she disguises as a fairy story on the art of batik. And also in Paris, she got very influenced by Bakst, who was the Russian ballet designer, and that brought a lot of colour into her work. So when they returned at the beginning of the First World War, fled back to Scotland, to Kirkcudbright, her designs became much more colourful. But I think this is a sort of middle period Jessie King. And by that I mean that early on she's, if you like, even more detailed and fine, minute lines. Later she becomes much broader, but here she is still very fine, but very colourful as well. She's a particular favourite of mine. And her very best things are not on paper, but on vellum. And this is on vellum.
Is it? I hadn't realised that.
Well, you can see there's this almost translucent feel to it. And it's a very special watercolour. As for the value, £3,000 to £5,000.
Oh, how marvellous. Wonderful.
I was told it was Japanese.
Well, it is. It's very, very boldly painted. This is a pomegranate. That symbolizes fertility, and you've got chrysanthemum for immortality. But the whole way this is done, this is a very unusual dish. It's a saucer dish, or deep saucer dish, and it's broken up into these kind of zones. And the way it's done, it's so schematic. It's actually done by the Japanese looking probably at Dutch copies of Chinese. They're actually doing it through an intermediary. That's why it looks so simple and so schematized. But it's a very early piece. This one probably dates from about 1660 to 1670. It's a wonderful example of the early export material made by the Japanese copying the Chinese. And one of the good things about this, and it's unusual to get this on this type of thing, is the fact that this porcelain sagged. It's a good characteristic of Japanese porcelain that it sags. That's why in the end they started putting little stilts to support it. Red, iron red around here, it's absolutely typical. And this rather battered state, well, who wouldn't be after all this time, is probably around about £200, but it could have been worth 2,000 or 3,000. All right?
I didn't break it.
Well, when you brought this in earlier today, sir, I thought we might have had something interesting. And I'm very grateful that you took the trouble to go home and bring us the rest of the object. She's a marvellous carved wooden figure of a Chinese lady, complete with little miniature feet, bound feet. And in fact, of course, she lives here in the top of the clock. It's, in our opinion, Chippendale, taken from Chippendale designs, which were first published in 1754, and in what is called the chinoiserie style. What we're not quite sure about is it could be provincial. In other words, people copied it. Generally, in the country, they didn't get it quite as good as they did in London. But the more I look at it, the more I think it's perfect. And it could have been one of a pair, because the Chinese lady's looking very much that way, and we wondered if maybe there wasn't another one. They quite often were. One clock, one barometer, or a thermometer. They could have been in pairs. Wonderful thing. You've got no history on it?
It belonged to my father's father, and that's all I know about it. He didn't know anything about it either.
Well, I think it's very difficult, this carved wood furniture.
But it is not wood.
Oh, it is.
It is wood.
Oh, it's definitely wood, yes. No, it's soft wood, probably pine.
Yes.
And it's all covered in thin coating of gesso, a plaster coating, and then painted. Now, normally these clocks were gilded. There's no sign of any gilding on the case. It was probably painted something on the lines of this sort of buffy, browny colour to match the painting in the house.
I was just wondering, can you account for this cut here?
Yes, that whole figure here was one block of wood. It was cut and pierced and then stuck on in separate pieces. The whole clock is made of separate pieces. You'd never get a big piece of wood that size and carve it in one. It dates, I think, from about 1760, and if we can just look at the dial of the clock, it's actually signed Pat Cock Not, which is probably Nottingham, almost certainly, abbreviation of Nottingham. Now, I can't find any record of him in the books I have here with me, so we don't really know at this point anything about him. There's a monogram lower down, and that would appear to be T.C. Usually, that's the monogram of the owner. And a lot more research would be needed to discover if we could find out the owner of the piece. It's possible it was in an important house near Nottingham. Originally, the dial was all silvered, which over the years has worn off. The movement is also period. Date, we're probably talking 1755, 1760-ish, I think. And really a wonderful object. Now, it comes to evaluation. I'm going to have to go out on my own. It's a very difficult piece. We've only had a short time to look at it. I think I'm going to go for something in excess of £20,000.
How much?
In excess of £20,000.
Well, I must say we certainly did not exaggerate the impact of the building of the Iron Bridge on the local decorative arts. Throughout our day here, we've seen dozens of pieces like this particular bone china mug made quite literally as a common garden souvenir and sold probably for a shilling or two, now valued at £300 to £400. And a similar value is put on this fine print, which is particularly interesting for us because it dates from 1782, just 1 year after the bridge was opened. Well, we've had a great day here in Wellington, but I particularly hope that you'll join us next week at the same time when we're off then to the coast of East Yorkshire. So until then, from everyone in Shropshire, goodbye.
The Antiques Roadshow is back next Sunday at the slightly later time of 5:30.